Section 3 looks at collecting data. So just a couple definitions over here. First of all, we have the population. The population in a statistical study is the entire group of individuals we want information about. Now, sometimes it's a little tricky to find out who the population is, so we may have to read a question very carefully as it may not be explicitly stated. Then within that population, we have a parameter, which is a numerical measurement describing our population data. In class, we will do quite a few examples for parameter that describes population. On the other hand, we have a sample, which is a part of the population from which we collect the information. The idea is if we can collect a sample in such a way that it is representative of the population, and if that's the case, then we can calculate a statistic, and with that, we can do an inference about the population. Now, today we're going to look at different sampling techniques, and again, the idea is choose a sampling method that gives us a representative sample. So not all samples or sampling techniques are equal. There are some better ones, and then there's some really bad ones. So a statistic is a numerical measurement describing our sample data, and the idea is, can we take the statistic and make inference and say something about the population parameter? The nice thing about these two words is that population and the parameter that describes it both start with P, where sample and statistic both start with S. So an easy way to remember that. In this illustration, you can see the population over here is the larger group. We take a random sample, we end up with a smaller group that's hopefully representative of our population. Let's dive into an example. A political scientist wants to know how college students feel about the Social Security system. She obtains a list of 3,456 undergraduates at her college and mails a questionnaire to 250 selected at random. Only 104 questionnaires are returned. So what is the population in the study? Again, remember, population may not be explicitly stated in our question, but what she is trying to find out about all college students. So not just the 3,456 undergraduates at her college, but she really wants to know about all college students. Next, we look at what is the sample. This is where we have to be a little careful. Let's look at all the numbers that are stated in the question. First of all, she obtains a list of 3,456 undergraduates. This is what we call our sample frame. This is where she picks her sample from. Next, we have the 250 students that are selected at random, and they're mailed a questionnaire. Again, you may think that these 250 students are her sample, but really we're only collecting on the 104 students that return their questionnaires. So our sample is the 104 students who return questionnaires. What are our observational units? Well, our observational units are the students. This is who we collect data about. What is the variable? It states over here we want to know about the feelings about Social Security. And it doesn't state exactly what the questions are, so this is good enough over here. Now the last part, which is the most important part, is what are some reasons the sample is not representative of the actual population that she's interested in. So this is really digging a little deeper and asking, what are the problems with this sampling technique? What are the problems with this sample? Is there anyone who's being left out? Well, that is definitely the first part over here. She sends out 250 questionnaires, but only gets 104 back. So really, more than half of the students didn't return the questionnaires. We call this non-response bias. Now, this could create a big issue because possibly the people that did respond may feel very strongly about the subject, and they may feel very differently than the rest of the 250 students that didn't return their surveys. So this really creates a big problem over here. Again, it's called non-response bias. So let me just write this down. People, so often when we have non-response, or even we call it self-response, because people choose whether to respond or not, people with strong feelings are the one that respond or return their surveys. But that's not the only problem, because she wants to know how college students feel about, and she only chooses students from her one college. So that is another problem. We have just one college. In particular, she's only looking at undergraduate students. So there's also graduate students that she didn't consider. Other questions may be, was her sample size big enough? And we'll get much more into that later on in the course. Maybe the type of questions that were asked were, tricky questions. Maybe people, were feeling it's kind of a touchy subject, so maybe there was some response bias depending on the wording of the question. Maybe there were people who didn't receive the questionnaires. So there's a lot of issues with this survey. So let me add over here. So again, touchy subject. Maybe the way questions were phrased, this could lead to response bias. We'll go more into the different types of bias later. Oftentimes, what I really am looking for is that you look very closely at the question and you really dig deep in order to figure out what is wrong with a specific survey or sampling technique.